Hello guys, welcome back to another Genshin video. So today I'm actually going to start a new series called the How to Buff series. We're going to talk about your favorite characters that you think need a buff. There are plenty of characters that need a buff in Genshin because most of them aren't really used that much because we have people like Kazuha, Bennett, Jincho, and all the other top tier characters that just outweigh them by a ton. So I'm here just to give some ideas on how I would buff these characters and make them more viable for in-game or just for casual play as well. Now the goal of this series isn't just to make them OP. I don't want to just make them trash to like godly like Zhongli. I just want to give them a little bit of a buff to make them more fun to play, more viable, and see more play in the Abyss and other in-game content that comes in the future. So yeah, the first person I'm going to start with is Lisa. I've been building a main DPS Lisa for a while and she's been one of my favorite characters since the beginning of the game, but she does have a few things that just make her lackluster and not as good as other characters. Don't get me wrong, she is still a good support, but as you can see by the usage rate, it's not really that amazing. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this new video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this new series. So let's get right onto what I would do to buff Lisa. For those who don't know, Lisa is an Electro Catalyst user, and she's really good at utilizing her burst to debuff enemies. She also has a very strong elemental skill that can get conductive stacks, and the more stacks you get, the more your holder damage will do. Each time you hit an enemy with the press elemental skill though, they get a conductive stat, and if enemies are close enough, it can bounce between the enemies to get stacks really fast. Also, when you pop an overload or superconduct reaction, the stacks also transfer through the overload explosion or superconduct explosion. So you can run superconduct and overload teams to help it spread it faster, or you can run electrocharge teams to help keep sustained DPS. Now let's look at her talents and see what I think is wrong with her and what I would buff. Okay, so we go to Lisa's talents right here. We have a normal attack that deal 4 lightning attack that deal electro damage. And of course the charge attack takes stamina but does an AoE electro damage charge attack. Honestly, there's not much about the normal attack I would fix in my opinion. Some people might feel differently. Some people might just want to increase the attack speed a little, decrease the charge attack stamina cost. But honestly, I think this right now is pretty fine where it is. Now let's talk about her elemental skill Violet Arc though. Every time you press Violet Arc, it will release a homing electro orb and it'll do electro damage, and of course each time it hits, it will get one of the conductive stacks, and then when you hold it, it will call down lightning doing more damage based on the stacks you have. But the problem with this one is that it takes so long to pop off, okay? You're sitting there for a while, just holding and holding in order for the lightning to strike down. Also, if you look at the skill attributes for Violet Arc, the holding cooldown is 16 seconds. So the first thing I would do to buff Lisa is reduce that holding cooldown from 16 seconds to 12 seconds. That'll allow you to pop the holding Violet Arc way more often, and also help you get more conductive stats faster because then you'll have a less of a cooldown so you can be able to press the skill again. Now I did say there was a problem about her elemental skill taking a long time to proc, but I'll actually get back into that later on in the video. But for right now, the only thing I'm going to buff about her elemental skill is holding cooldown reduce from 16 seconds to 14 seconds. This will be really useful and just make her way more reliable and put out a lot more DPS than she can already. Now her next ability is Lightning Rose, which Lightning Rose is just a layup that you place down on the field, and there's a circle AoE, and it will do electro damage to nearby opponents and knock them back. This ability specifically gets more useful with one of her passives, which I'll get into right after we talk about her elemental burst. And here's the Lightning Rose. Of course the description is exactly what I just said, but if you go to skill attributes, at level 7 the discharge damage is 54%, duration 15 seconds, cooldown 20 seconds, and energy cost of 80. Now, this might be a little controversial, people might think I'm kinda stupid for this, but I honestly think the 80 energy cost is fine, okay? I know a lot of people want it reduced down to 60 and stuff, but I find it that even when I'm using Lisa in like a team that has no other electro characters, it's not too majorly hard to get electro particles. Of course, you can pair her up with like a Beta or Official or any other electro character to make it way easier. But when I put her in, for example, my Ningguang Zhongli Lisa Bennett team, I find it pretty easy to get her burst consistently. I don't know about you guys, but it's kind of the same for Beta, because Beta does have an 80 energy cost, and of course she does get it way faster, or in way more reliably, if you do use another electro character. But if you do use it in other teams, you can still get her bursts pretty often. I get her bursts pretty often on my Ningguang team as well, so people might think I'm stupid, but I'ma keep this energy cost at 80. And I'ma justify this 80 energy cost by another buff I'm gonna give her. Okay, so next let's talk about her passives. I honestly think her passives are really good, and they don't need much of a change, but there is one passive ability I do want to kind of buff, because we're in the age where we have Bennett boosting your attack, we have Kazuha swelling up enemies, boosting your elemental damage bonuses, and giving you elemental mastery. We have Zhongli reducing physical and elemental resistance just by proccing his shield. We're in the age of reducing a whole bunch of resistance, and Lisa's resistance shredding, it is good, but it could use a little bit of a bump. So her first passive is Infused Aftershock, where hits by charge attacks apply Violet Arc's conductive status effects to opponents, which I do not think this needs a change. I do really think this is a good passive. Now her next passive is Static Electricity Field, which opponents hit by an elemental burst have the defense decreased by 50% for 10 seconds. Now this is really good and what really makes Lisa shine as a support and also a main DPS because it does help her damage too. Decreasing defense is really valuable in this game. The thing I want to buff about this is, since it's 15% defense, I want to buff this passive to decrease the defense by 20%. So many other characters that people stack on one team can do the same thing, just reduce elemental resistance and then give elemental mastery. They can also reduce their specific element res, but that is why I justify this being increased to 20% instead of 15%. This will definitely make Lisa way more viable in endgame because defense shredding is really helpful once again. So that's all for the talents and passives that I want to buff. I think these little changes will just make her way more reliable and way more fun to use and help her get buffed in the endgame. Now let's talk about constellations. Most of the constellations are pretty good, I will admit. Her constellations are not bad. But once again, like the talents, there's just some little things about the constellations that don't really make any sense, and just I don't think they should be there. So now, let's take a look. So if we take a look at Lisa's constellations right here, the first constellation is really good. This is staying the same. Lisa generates 2 energy for every opponent hit while holding Violet Arc, and a maximum of 10 energy can be obtained. This constellation is when you see Lisa's in videos, if you've seen them, where they hold their elemental skill, and then they pop it, and you just see a wave of electrical particles coming at them. This is really good. Don't need a change. But this constellation is what I do want to change. Because once again, holding your Violet Arc, you're just sitting there and waiting for it to pop off, and it just takes a while. So it increases defense while holding it, and increases Lisa's resistance to interruption. The resistance to interruption is a really good part of this constellation, not gonna lie. Because you do not want to get knocked around while just sitting there holding this thing. But the increase of defense, I don't really see why it needs to be there. So I'm gonna change it up a little bit. Instead of increases defense by 25 seconds, I'm gonna have this constellation reduce the holding time of Violet Arc by 25%. Yeah, I see some of you smiling. Yeah, you know that'll be fire. So if we take a look over here, I'm just gonna hold down Violet Arc and see how long that takes, and I'm gonna release it. And now I'm gonna build a side-by-side comparison of 100% speed and 125% speed, just to show you how fast that 25% will speed up this waiting time. I believe this will make this constellation so good and so hopeful for Lisa's. You're really going to be chasing after these constellations if this did happen. The problem with Lisa constellations that people don't really like is after you get constellation 1, you don't really get any extremely good constellations until the last constellation. So it's kinda just meh. But now after this, you'll hopefully want to get this constellation. And of course the increased hold down speed of Violet Arc will make this way more reliable, way more easy to use, and just feel way better. Constellation 3 and 5 increase the level of elemental skills and bursts, so obviously these do not need to change because they're on every single character. But then we're going to go to Constellation 4, which increases the number of lightning bolts released by lightning rolls by 1 to 3. Now, that's obviously a problem based on the wording, you can tell right there. Why is it random? Why isn't it just 3? So I'm going to of course change this to increase the number of lightning bolts released by lightning rolls by 3, and no randomness at all. No 1 to 3, no 2 to 3, nothing. Just a straight base, increase the number of lightning bolts released by 3. There's not much I really need to say about that buff because, you know, it's just giving more damage and make it less RNG. Because for Constellation 4, there needs to be no RNG about it. And her last constellation, I'm going to keep the same because this last constellation is really goated. When Lisa takes a field, she applies C-stacks of conductive status effect to nearby opponents, which can happen every 5 seconds. So this is really good. You can easily apply stacks to enemies very fast. And it just makes her way easier to use and way more reliable. And there we go, those are all done for the constellations of Lisa. Now the last thing I want to possibly talk about changing, this really depends on what happens in the future. If Electro doesn't get a major buff through its elemental reactions, because as we know, Electro reactions don't really do the most damage in the game, and they're kinda lackluster unless you want to pop Electro Charge, which is honestly really good, or Superconduct just to reduce the resistance of enemies, but the Superconduct Explosion does no damage, and Overload, it does a little bit of damage, but mainly just knocks people back, which can sometimes be annoying. So if you look at her Ascension talents, what happens is, she gets increased Elemental Mastery as she gets leveled up. Now I want to vary this Elemental Mastery gain, depending on if they buff Electro. If they buff Electro, I want them to keep this the same, because this would be really good for Lisa, but if they don't, I want to change this Elemental Mastery into Energy Recharge. Energy recharge on Lisa would be very helpful because once again, her burst is 80. It's not that much of a problem, but a little energy recharge wouldn't hurt nobody. So I think that'd be a good change if they don't buff Electro. Okay, and there we go. That is the first installment of how to buff for Lisa. Do you guys agree with what I buffed in this video? Let me know in the comments. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video in this new series that I'm going to be starting up. Already have other characters planned for future videos. You could probably assume who I already planned for based on how popular some characters are. But yeah, that's all for me. Shout out to all the main DPS Lisas and support Lisas out there. I know y'all are having fun because I'm having fun building her as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.